Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Emily always thought she knew David better than anyone. From the start of their marriage, he came across as a man of integrity, responsible and dedicated to his career. Their evening talks after work were usually light, just everyday things, future plans, simple stuff that kept them close. But lately there was something different in his voice. A weight it hadn't carried before. When he talked about work, his expression changed. His sentences got shorter, like each word was measured to avoid saying too much. Emily noticed, and even though she tried to ignore it, that disguised silence sparked a growing curiosity. It all started when David mentioned that the company was going through leadership changes and a new manager had taken over his department. The name Michael Thompson came up casually, but it stuck in Emily's memory. He was described as someone who got the job not through merit but through family connections. David said his decisions were rushed and often hurt the team. To Emily, who'd always admired her husband's competence and hard work, hearing about a boss like that felt unfair. At first, she just felt angry on David's behalf for having to deal with such leadership. The stories became more frequent. David came home visibly drained and when asked said he'd spent the day handling confusing orders and pointless changes. Interested in understanding what was really going on, Emily started asking more questions. She wanted to know what Michael was like, how he acted in meetings, what kind of attitude he had with employees. David answered with straightforward descriptions, almost always tinged with frustration. With each response, Michael's image formed in Emily's mind like a puzzle being put together piece by piece. She started noticing that the more she listened, the more she wanted to know. She pictured his face, his tone of voice, how he interacted with people. At first, she believed this curiosity was just about understanding what her husband was going through. After all, in her mind, any wife would do the same. But over time, this interest began to feel different, like there was a certain fascination in the mystery. The first moment Michael stopped being just a name was when Emily accidentally found a photo of him on social media. It was a simple picture taken at a corporate event, but it was enough to spark a stronger interest. She didn't mention it to David, just looked at the photo for a few moments, trying to match the face to the story she'd heard. There was something in his posture that made her want to know more, like she needed to confirm for herself whether her husband's criticisms were completely fair. Emily began paying attention whenever David mentioned work. Any comment about a meeting or event where Michael would be present seemed to set off a quiet alert inside her. It was as if every detail was a crucial piece in figuring out who he really was. Nothing was explicit yet, but that curiosity was already taking up too much space in her thoughts. Without even realizing it, Emily started creating an internal script, almost like she was preparing for the moment she might see him in person. It was subtle, something she wouldn't even admit to herself. But it was clear by then that Michael wasn't just the problematic boss messing up David's routine. He had become an intriguing figure wrapped in a mix of criticism and mystery, and that combination was having an unexpected effect on her. The day Emily saw Michael in person for the first time was significant for her, even though she tried to act like it was no big deal. David invited her to a company dinner, one of those events that mixed formality with relaxation, where spouses were welcome. She accepted right away, and her anticipation started building the moment she found out Michael would be there. She didn't tell David how curious she was. She just got ready more carefully than usual, as if unconsciously wanting to make a good impression. When she saw him for the first time, she felt a strange mix of surprise and confirmation. He didn't look exactly like the pictures she'd found, but there was something in the way he carried himself, the confident way he interacted with others that immediately caught her attention. When they were introduced, Emily smiled naturally. exchanged a few words, and noticed Michael had a firm but not aggressive tone of voice. He was polite, and even in just a few sentences he showed confidence. After that meeting, the interest that had only been fed by stories took on clearer shape. Emily started noticing details, the way he looked people directly in the eye during conversations, how he gestured when explaining something, how easily he moved between different groups. To her, each gesture seemed to carry a deeper meaning. David during the event seemed uncomfortable at times. He noticed Emily's attention was more focused on Michael than on anyone else. It wasn't obvious, but the frequency with which she directed comments to him or used small opportunities to get closer created a silent unease. Still, David tried to keep his composure, talking to other colleagues and avoiding showing irritation in front of everyone. In the days that followed, Emily started bringing up Michael more often. In casual conversations, she found ways to mention something he'd said at the event or highlight a gesture she found interesting. She always kept her tone light, like it was just an innocent observation, but there was too much enthusiasm to go unnoticed. David began responding more curtly when the topic came up, but Emily either didn't notice or pretended not to. The situation gained momentum when Emily found what seemed like a harmless reason to talk to Michael. One day, she got the idea to organize a surprise party for David. And in her mind, it would be nice to involve someone from his job to make the plan feel more convincing. She sent Michael a message explaining the idea and asking if he'd be willing to help, maybe invite some co-workers and help keep it secret. He replied immediately, seeming open to the idea. And so their conversations began. At first, they only exchanged messages to discuss possible dates, guest lists, and small details to make the event special. But as weeks passed, the party started fading into the background. Their talks began to go in other directions. First comments about funny office situations, then inside jokes that grew out of those exchanges. Gradually, more personal messages started appearing along with subtle compliments and a tone that had nothing to do with the party anymore. In the end, the celebration plan never happened. The subject was gradually dropped as if it didn't matter, but their contact continued. For Emily, it wasn't about the party anymore. It was about the constant attention Michael gave her. The feeling that there was a mutual interest that went beyond any professional courtesy. David, on the other hand, began to feel that something in Emily's behavior had changed. She showed more interest in events tied to his job, accepted invitations to meetings and gatherings she used to turn down, and always seemed more excited when she knew Michael would be there. There was no direct confrontation at that point, but the atmosphere between them already carried a different weight, like a silent distance was settling in, creating space for tension to grow without either of them putting into words what was really happening. The company's year-end party was highly anticipated, and David, even without much enthusiasm, knew he had to attend. Emily insisted on going with him, acting like it was completely natural. But deep down, she was anxious for another chance to see Michael. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. There was a quiet expectation, an interest she refused to admit to herself. The hall was full of overlapping conversations, music, and scattered laughter. David greeted a few colleagues while Emily discreetly scanned the groups to find Michael. When she finally spotted him talking with some executives, she realized he had noticed her too. A brief smile exchanged from a distance was enough to make her feel part of a private code only they understood. As time passed, the conversations blended together, and at one point all three, David, Emily, and Michael, ended up close. A comment about the team's tough year sparked a discussion. David, used to dealing with the boss's flawed decisions, made firm remarks about internal problems. Michael countered with justifications that to David sounded like excuses. That's when Emily stepped in, saying she understood the pressure Michael was under and that people often judged without knowing all the facts. Her tone left no doubt she was taking his side. David was surprised but kept his cool. Michael, though, responded with a slight laugh, thanking Emily's words as if she were a long-time ally. That lit a spark in David, who fired back more directly, pointing out specific failures that had hurt the whole team. Emily didn't hesitate. She defended Michael again, saying, "Change takes time, and instead of criticism, people should support those trying their best." The people around started paying attention. Some exchanged glances, sensing the tension in the air. The argument, which seemed professional to most, clearly carried a personal weight for David. He felt every word from Emily confirmed that something between them had shifted. With each sentence, his sense of isolation grew, like his own wife was choosing to stand beside someone else in front of everyone. The moment that really ignited the tension was when David exposed in front of everyone a recent mistake that had cost the company dearly. His tone was firm, his words heavy with built-up frustration. Before Michael could even respond, Emily jumped in, her voice full of conviction, saying that if Michael held the position, it was because he was capable, and like any leader, he deserved respect. The atmosphere turned heavy. Some masked their discomfort, others stopped talking to watch the scene unfold. Michael, with a cold smile, decided to strike back. He looked straight at David and said sharply that this kind of insubordination wasn't tolerated, and if he wasn't satisfied, the company door was wide open. The words landed like a calculated blow, and the arrogant tone only drew more attention from everyone nearby. David reacted instantly, calling Michael incompetent and saying the company was sinking because of his decisions. The murmuring grew louder. Some tried to intervene. Others just watched the clash, knowing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for months. David then turned to Emily and said firmly it was time to leave. Her response hit like an emotional punch. Looking at her husband, she said she wouldn't go with him and that what he'd just done to his boss was wrong. The silence that followed was broken by hushed comments and stunned looks. For David, this was the confirmation of everything he'd been feeling lately. He stared at her for a few seconds without responding, just absorbing the weight of disappointment. Then he turned and walked out of the party, crossing the hall while Emily stayed by Michael's side, as if her bond with her husband had shattered right there in front of everyone. David left the party and went straight home. He didn't want to deal with conversations or explanations at that moment. He arrived, dropped his jacket on the sofa and sat in silence, trying to sort through his thoughts. Images of the argument kept coming back, the tone in Emily's voice, the way she had defended Michael as if he were someone worthy of that loyalty. He waited for her to come home that night, but the hours passed and the door stayed closed. It wasn't until the next morning that Emily finally came in. David was awake, sitting at the table, and asked directly where she had spent the night. She just looked at him and walked to the bedroom without saying a word. The atmosphere became unbearable. Silence filled the rest of the day and continued through the entire weekend. There was no argument, no attempt to reconnect, just a void that made it clear something had broken for good. On Monday, David woke up with his decision made. Since the party, Michael's presence at the company had become unbearable. The mere idea of crossing paths with that man in the hallway, hearing his voice in meetings, or taking orders from someone who had crossed every line was something he wasn't willing to endure. This wasn't just a professional conflict. It was personal, deep, and filled with resentment. Working under Michael's command would be like accepting humiliation every single day. He left the house early without breakfast, his mind fixed on what he would say. On the way, he mentally rehearsed every word, even imagining Michael's expression when he found out David was leaving. When he arrived, he didn't stop by his desk or greet any co-workers. He went straight to the administrative department and then, without telling anyone, headed to the director's office. Anyone who tried to stop him got only a brief nod, as if talking would be a waste of time given the urgency he carried. He opened the door and walked in. The director looked up, surprised by the sudden entrance, but David didn't waste time. He said clearly that he was there to submit his resignation. He stated that after what had happened, he no longer wanted to stay in a workplace led by Michael. He explained that he respected the company, but his dignity meant more than any paycheck. The director stayed silent for a moment, observing David's firmness. Then he leaned back in his chair and said that wouldn't be necessary. He looked David straight in the eye and added, Michael had been let go that morning. Shocked, David asked how that had happened. The director took a deep breath and said he regretted being the one to deliver the news, but he'd rather David hear it directly. He explained that at the party, Michael had stayed with Emily in front of everyone and the two had left together. The words hit hard. David stayed silent for a few seconds, absorbing what he just heard. Without another word, he left the office and went back home. Emily was on the sofa scrolling through her phone. He walked in, stood in front of her, and asked if what he'd heard was true. She didn't try to deny it. She said it had been a moment of weakness, that she couldn't really explain it, that things had gotten out of control. David listened without interrupting, but there was no hesitation in the decision he'd already made. He told her to pack her things and leave. Emily stayed frozen for a moment, but when she realized he wouldn't change his mind, she got up and started gathering her belongings. The silence in the house was nearly suffocating, and the door closed behind her without a single word said. The divorce went through faster than Emily expected. In just a few weeks, everything was settled on paper. David signed every document with the same coldness he'd shown since the day he asked her to leave. There were no messages, no phone calls, no sign of regret. Everything was handled strictly through lawyers, as if every connection had been erased. For Emily, that final stamp felt like a sharp blow. Still, she clung to the idea that somehow she might find support in Michael. Shortly after receiving the official divorce confirmation, Emily picked up her phone, didn't think too much, and typed a short message to Michael. "We need to talk. Can you meet me?" She sent it immediately, but no reply came. She spent the rest of the day staring at her screen, waiting for a notification that never arrived. She was starting to believe he'd just ignore her when the next morning her phone vibrated. It was him agreeing to meet and suggesting a quiet cafe away from the company and any place they might be recognized. Emily dressed carefully and arrived early, choosing a corner table where she could see the entrance. Her heart raced when she saw Michael appear. He approached with a serious expression, nothing like the warmth or interest she had imagined. When he sat down, he made no move to get closer, keeping the posture of someone who was there only to close a loose end. They sat, and Emily tried to start the conversation by bringing up what they'd shared, saying she'd made tough choices and that right now he was the only person she felt connected to. Michael listened in silence, stirring his coffee until he finally said what they had was just a moment, something he never meant to extend. He added that since the incident at the party, his professional life had gotten complicated and he didn't want any more involvement. Emily had no immediate response. She tried to argue, saying she'd risked everything, but he just repeated that it was better they go their separate ways. He finished his coffee, stood up, and left, leaving her alone at the table. The scene was so quick she took a while to process what had just happened. From there, everything fell apart even more. Without David, rejected by Michael, and without family support, she stayed with a friend. But the arrangement didn't last. The friend started hearing about the affair and decided she didn't want to be involved. From there, Emily moved to her aunt's house, where she stayed a few days. During that time, Emily managed to get a temporary job at a downtown store. It was modest, but enough to move out of her aunt's place and rent a small one-bedroom apartment. Simple, with no luxuries. It wasn't the home she'd imagined for herself, but it represented an attempt to restart and, above all, to regain a bit of her independence. While Emily tried to rebuild her life, David was also making drastic decisions. After everything he learned, the betrayal, the scene at the party, the confirmation that Emily had spent the night with Michael, staying at the same company and in the same city became unbearable. Every hallway in the building felt loaded with memories and whispered comments. Even though Michael was already gone, the story had spread and David felt the weight of stares and disguised questions. He tried to keep up his routine for a few weeks, but the tension built every day. The memories were constant, and no matter how much he avoided the topic, he knew everyone there had their own version of events. One morning, he walked into the director's office, thanked him for the opportunity, and handed in his resignation. This time, there was no debate or attempt to convince him to stay. His decision was final. A few days later, he started packing. He sold some furniture, kept only the essentials, and moved to another city far enough away that he could start over without being recognized or remembered for the story. For David, more than just changing addresses, it was a way to erase every trace of that chapter and make room for a completely new life. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time. In the heart-wrenching tale of Emily, David, and Michael, we uncover a profound life lesson: the fragile beauty of trust and the devastating cost of betrayal. Emily's innocent curiosity spiraled into an affair that shattered her marriage, leaving her isolated and broken, while David, wounded but resolute, chose to rebuild his life with dignity. This story reminds us that true love isn't found in fleeting attractions or forbidden thrills, but in the quiet commitment we nurture every day. It's a stark warning against letting unchecked desires erode the foundations of our relationships. Once cracked, they may never mend. Imagine the pain of realizing too late that what you chased was an illusion, abandoning the one who truly cherished you. Life teaches us that integrity and loyalty are our greatest treasures. Without them, we risk losing everything that matters. Cherish your bonds, honor your vows, and remember, redemption often comes through self-reflection and growth. What lessons have you drawn from similar experiences? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories and insights. If this touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more inspiring tales that make us wiser. Let's grow together.